speaking of that, we've seen your timeline. It's remarkable. In your opinion, over what time span did the Dead Sea Scrolls were produced at Qumran?
Okay. Standard belief by scholars today is that those scrolls were produced between 200 BC and 100 AD.
Yeah.
I think that the scrolls that they found, except for some of the Paleo-Hebrew, and were produced during that time frame. Here's what they don't understand, or may not understand, is this. If I take out a King James Bible from the 1930s and I lay it on this desk, and you look at the print on it, the print represents that era, the 1930s,
Right.
close to my lifetime. Here's a Bible, and let's say that there was no dates in it. You open that up at 6,000 years from now, and you look at that. Well, this book came from the 1930s. It's very easy to document because the writing on here, the font, is a 1930s font.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a problem with Qumran. Those documents could have been written centuries prior, and I believe they were, some of them, centuries prior, and then they were recopied and recopied and recopied because they were skins. And anytime that a scroll gets out of date, worn out, especially the Torah, Jewish people will very gently roll this thing up, and they'll handle it very delicately, and they'll place it in a place of honor, and they will store it away, like a genizah is what it's called. They store it away. So those documents were probably from that time frame, 300 or 200 to 100 AD, but the originals were written well before that,
okay.
and these were copies of the originals that were written well before that, because if you look, and I believe it's a community rule. The community rule, even at near the very end of it, it says that these things were written by, dictated by Jeremiah and written by his scribe Baruch. So why would he be mentioned in there as being the writer of it? Because if they were guys from Qumran, their integrity was phenomenal. They were just amazing, religious, and devout men. They're not going to make up a story, and they call it pseudepigraphal, where somebody puts another guy's name on it to give it more clout. They didn't do that kind of stuff.
Which brings to mind something I want to interject in here, and that's simply that those original writings that they had, they're probably treasures to them, in my opinion.
Oh, without a doubt.
And since we're going to go into the 1st century, possibly inhabiting Qumran as late as 68 of the Common Era, then it's possible maybe some of the New Testament books were being copied and written there, and it's possible that could have happened. Yet we find none at Qumran, and we don't find probably those originals that they took. It has been an opinion of mine that wherever they went when they left Qumran, they took those with them and left some of these in the jars for us to discover. What do you think about that position?
I think it's entirely possible, because I am of the absolute opinion that Jesus, Yeshua, and John the Baptist were from this sect called the Yachad. And they're also called the Banaim, which means the builders or carpenters, if you will. They were also called the Way, and Paul said in his writings, as he stood in front of King Agrippa, I admit to one of your charges, I am of the sect of the Way. So, and they're also called the Sons of Light. There's many numbers of parallels with that. My son wrote a short book on the parallels with the early Christian church, and it's amazing. All the things that line up with these Qumran people with what's going on with the early church, if you will. It's fascinating. So yes, I'm in agreement with you.
And is it possible that Jesus himself, during those years that we didn't hear about him in the Bible, was at Qumran?
Here's what I think. You remember after he was 12 years old, and his mom and dad went back looking for him and found him in the temple. He was answering questions. Okay. I think At 12 years old, the guys at Qumran, it's common practice, was they took this young son of the commandments, bar mitzvah, they took him to the men of Qumran, and there were other locations for what they call today, they call them Essenes. They took them there and they raised them. And they raised them into young men, because a priest is not eligible to begin his full functioning as a priest until what age? 30 years old. When did Jesus show up? 30 years old. But there was a guy that came out before him making straight the way of the Lord. He was 30 years old 6 months prior. And according to the calendars that I got out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, John the Baptist was born at Passover. Interesting.
Makes sense.
Because they expected Elijah to come at Passover. Every year at Passover, and I'm going to be doing a Passover Seder for a Christian church here tonight, they set a plate on the table for the Passover, and guess who they set it for? Elijah. During the Passover meal, the kids get up and they go to the front door and they yell, and they start looking for Elijah.
Right.
Well, Jesus said, if you'll accept it, John the Baptist was Elijah, even on the cross. He's on the cross, and they're sitting there saying, he's saying, Eloi, Eloi, and he's beginning to cry out to God. They thought he was calling out to who?
Yeah.
Elijah.
Yes.
So now John the Baptist, he's made straight the way of the Lord. He comes into the picture 6 months prior to Jesus. Jesus shows up at Pentecost. Did y'all know that? He shows up at Pentecost because this dove that came down, and this thing that came down in the image of a dove hovered over him or on him, however you want to look at it. But that's not the first time that happened. Happened at Mount Sinai when Moses was there. Though the same thing, tongues of fire came down and hovered on the heads of the people. Happened again when? Happened again at Pentecost after the crucifixion.
Right.
50 days after the crucifixion. He said, wait here until you're endued with power.
Mm-hmm.
That was the giving of the word. Jesus is the living word, and he shows up exactly on the right day.
Awesome.
You see that?
Yeah, see it. That's great.